In the glittering splendour of Haverford Hall, a grand banquet unfolds, where elegance hides deadly secrets. When a guest collapses, poisoned by a perfect lemon soufflé, suspicion falls on 4 souls: a fiery chef, a trembling waiter, a burdened host, and a cunning rival. Only Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet village wisdom, can unravel the web of ambition, betrayal, and murder before the truth slips away. Who laced the dessert with cyanide? And why? The clock is ticking, and no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The Grand Banquet. The late summer sun cast a golden glow over Haverford Hall, its ivy-clad walls standing sentinel over the manicured lawns of St. Mary Mead. The village, usually drowsy in August's warmth, thrummed with excitement for Sir Henry Haverford's annual banquet, a tradition that drew the county's most distinguished names. The great oak doors of the hall stood wide, welcoming a procession of polished motor cars that crunched along the gravel drive. Inside, the dining hall sparkled with opulence. Crystal chandeliers gleamed, their prisms scattering light across damask tablecloths. And the air was fragrant with roses arranged in towering silver vases. The clink of fine china and the murmur of cultured voices filled the space, a symphony of privilege and propriety. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the end of the long mahogany table, observed the scene with her customary quietude. Her invitation had come as a courtesy, a nod to her late nephew's friendship with Sir Henry during their Oxford days. She wore her usual black lace dress, modest yet elegant, her white hair neatly coiled beneath a small hat. In her lap, her knitting needles moved with a steady rhythm, producing a scarf that grew imperceptibly with each course. Her mild blue eyes, deceptively soft, darted from face to face, noting the subtle currents beneath the guests' polished smiles. "There's always a story behind a banquet," she thought, her mind as sharp as the silver cutlery before her. Sir Henry, resplendent in a tailored dinner jacket, presided at the head of the table, his charm as host masking the strain of recent business troubles. To his right sat Lord Reginald Ashby, a man whose florid complexion and booming laugh dominated the room. Ashby, a textile magnate with a reputation for ruthlessness, was no stranger to controversy, and his presence tonight had raised eyebrows among the village gossips. Beside him was Lady Beatrice Langley, his chief rival, her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon, her green eyes glinting with a wit that bordered on predatory. The other guests, local gentry, a retired colonel, a nervous young curate, added to the tableau, each playing their part in the evening's delicate dance. The meal progressed with meticulous grace. A velouté of asparagus gave way to roasted pheasant, each dish a testament to the genius of Chef Pierre Dubois, whose culinary prowess was whispered about as far as London. Waiters, led by the heel lanky Thomas, moved with practised precision, their white-gloved hands presenting plates with a flourish. Miss Marple noted Thomas's slight tremor as he served her, his eyes avoiding hers. Nerves, she mused, or something more. As the main course was cleared, anticipation built for the dessert, the evening's crown jewel. Chef Dubois had promised a lemon soufflé, a confection so light it was said to defy gravity, its surface kisseled with a glaze of candied zest. When the dishes arrived, a collective sigh rose from the table. The soufflés, puffed to perfection, quivered delicately in their ramekins, their pale yellow hue catching the candlelight. Guests murmured their approval as forks sank into the airy delight, and even Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile at the first tart-sweet bite. But the harmony shattered with a guttural cry. Lord Ashby, halfway through his soufflé, clutched his throat, his face twisting in anguish. His fork clattered to the table, scattering crumbs, and his body convulsed once, twice, before he slumped forward, his head striking the table with a sickening thud. Gasps erupted, chairs scraped back, and a woman's scream, Lady Beatrice's, Miss Marple noted, pierced the air. Sir Henry leapt to his feet, his face ashen, calling for a doctor. Dr. Hayworth, a guest seated nearby, pushed through the crowd, his fingers seeking a pulse that was not there. Miss Marple remained seated, her knitting needles still, her eyes scanning the chaos. The room was a flurry of movement, guests whispering, waiters frozen in shock, Sir Henry barking orders, but her mind was already at work, sifting through the details. The soufflé, the scream, the swiftness of death. Poison, she thought, recalling a long-ago case in St. Mary Mead where a similar tragedy had unfolded. As Dr. Hayworth pronounced Ashby dead, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the half-eaten dessert, its innocent appearance now cloaked in menace. The banquet, so carefully orchestrated, had become a stage for murder, and Miss Marple knew the real work was only beginning. Chapter 2. The Shadow of Suspicion. The morning after the calamity at Haverford Hall dawned with a deceptive serenity. The sun filtering through the tall windows of the dining hall, now silent save for the occasional creak of the house settling. The grandeur of the previous evening had dissolved into a sombre tableau, the air heavy with the residue of shock and suspicion. The great table, stripped of its damask cloth, stood bare, its polished surface reflecting the muted light like a mirror to the night's tragedy. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair in the drawing-room, her knitting bag at her side, observed the subdued comings and goings of the household with her characteristic calm. Her needles clicked softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to the tension that clung to the walls like damp. Inspector Craddock arrived promptly at 9, his sturdy frame filling the doorway as he entered with a notebook in hand and a constable trailing behind. Miss Marple had known him for years, a competent man with a methodical mind, though she often thought he underestimated the complexities of human nature. He greeted her with a nod, his expression a mix of respect and faint exasperation, for he knew her penchant for seeing what others missed. "A bad business, Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chair opposite her. "Poison, doctor, Hayworth says. Likely cyanide, from the symptoms. We've sent the soufflé remnants to the laboratory in London, but I don't expect surprises. It's murder, plain and simple." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes bright with interest. "Plain, perhaps, but simple? I think not, Inspector. Poison is so intimate, don't you find? It requires a certain boldness, yet also a cowardice to strike without facing one's victim." Her needles paused, and she looked past him to the window, where the rose garden bloomed in defiant beauty. "Have you spoken to the staff?" Craddock flipped open his notebook. "We've begun. The kitchen's in an uproar, naturally. Chef Dubois is taking it as a personal insult to his craft. The waiter, Thomas, was serving the dessert. He's a bundle of nerves. Sir Henry's cooperating, though he's cagey about his dealings with Ashby. And then there's Lady Beatrice Langley, who was seated right beside the victim. 4 suspects, all with opportunity, but motive? That's where it gets murky." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Murky, yes, but murk can be cleared with patience. Tell me, who had access to the dessert before it reached Lord Ashby's plate?" Craddock sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. That's the trouble. The kitchen was a hive last night. Staff in and out, ingredients everywhere. Dubois swears he prepared the soufflés himself, but he's prickly, won't let us near his workspace without a fight. Thomas carried the plates to the table, and Sir Henry oversaw the seating. Lady Beatrice, well, she was at the table, close enough to tamper if she had a mind to. We're still piecing together the timeline. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sifting through the fragments. I should like to see the kitchen, if I may, and perhaps speak to the suspects myself. One learns so much from a conversation, don't you think? Craddock raised an eyebrow, but agreed, accustomed to her unorthodox methods. He arranged for her to stay at Haverford Hall, at Sir Henry's insistence, to assist discreetly. Miss Marple gathered her knitting and followed him to the servants' wing, her steps light but purposeful. The kitchen was a cavernous space, its copper pots gleaming despite the morning's chaos. Chef Pierre Dubois stood at the centre, a wiry man with a shock of dark hair and eyes that burned with indignation. He was scouring a saucepan with such vigour that Miss Marple feared for its surface. "This is an outrage," declared, his French accent thick with emotion. "My soufflé, my art defiled, I, Pierre Dubois, have cooked for dukes, for ambassadors, and never has such a thing been suggested." Miss Marple smiled placatingly, settling onto a stool near the workbench. "Your reputation precedes you, Monsieur Dubois," she said, her tone soothing. "The soufflé was exquisite, I assure you. I tasted it myself. But tell me, how was it prepared? Every detail matters, you see." Dubois, mollified by her flattery, launched into a passionate account. The soufflés, he explained, were a delicate balance of egg whites, sugar, and fresh lemon juice, baked at the last moment to ensure their ethereal rise. The glaze, candied lemon zest mixed with a touch of syrup, was applied just before serving. He had overseen every step, from whisking the batter to plating the desserts. "No one touches my kitchen," he insisted, though his eyes flickered when Miss Marple asked about his movements during the evening. "I did step out briefly," he admitted, "to the garden for lemons. The ones in the pantry were not perfect, and I will not serve less than perfection. But I was gone only minutes, 5, perhaps 6. The kitchen was locked, and my assistants were busy with the main course." Miss Marple's needles clicked as she considered this. 5 minutes was ample time for someone to slip in, especially if the pantry door, as she had noticed, was unsecured. She inhaled subtly, catching a faint bitter scent in the air. Not the citrus tang of the soufflé, but something sharper, like almonds. Cyanide, she thought, though she kept her expression bland. "And did anyone else handle the glaze?" she asked. Dubois bristled. "No, the glaze was my creation, applied by my hand. You think I would let some clumsy fool ruin it?" But his confidence wavered when Craddock pressed him about a prior altercation with Lord Ashby. Dubois' face darkened. "That man," he spat. "He dared to call my cocoa vin pedestrian at a dinner last month. Pedestrian! I told him he knew nothing of cuisine, and he laughed in my face. But poison! I would sooner poison my own soul than my food." Miss Marple noted the chef's pride, as fragile as his soufflés, and the resentment that simmered beneath it. She thanked him and moved on, her mind turning to the waiter Thomas, whom Craddock had summoned to the servants' hall. Thomas was a lanky young man, barely 20, with pale skin and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. He stood before Craddock and Miss Marple, twisting a cloth napkin in his hands, his knuckles white. A bandage on his index finger caught Miss Marple's attention, the edges frayed as if applied in haste. "A cut," he mumbled when she inquired. "From a broken glass last night. It's nothing." Craddock's questions were brisk. "You served Lord Ashby's table, Thomas. Did you notice anything unusual about his dessert? Anything different about the plate, the glaze, the smell?" Thomas shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. It was just like the others. I took the plates from the kitchen, carried them to the table, and served them as chef told me. Lord Ashby's was the third I set down, I think. I didn't look closely. It was a busy night, and I was trying not to drop anything." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost grandmotherly. "It must be difficult, Thomas, serving such a grand gathering. So many plates, so many eyes on you. Did you know Lord Ashby well?" Thomas flushed, his fingers tightening on the napkin. "Not well, ma'am. I heard him talking, though, during the meal. He was loud, said things about Sir Henry, about his business not doing well, laughed about it like it was a joke. I didn't like him much, but I didn't do anything, I swear." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to his agitation. She recalled a young man in St. Mary Mead, a gardener's boy, who had trembled just so when questioned about a theft. Guilt, she knew, could manifest in many forms, but so could fear. "And your cut, Thomas," she said lightly. "When did it happen? Before or after you served the dessert?" "After," he said quickly, too quickly. "I was clearing glasses and one broke. It was an accident." His eyes darted to Craddock, then to the floor. Miss Marple said nothing more, but her mind catalogued the inconsistency. A broken glass, perhaps, but why the haste in his answer? As Thomas was dismissed, Craddock muttered, "He's hiding something, but is it murder? He's too skittish for a cold-blooded killer." Miss Marple did not reply, her thoughts drifting to the next suspect. Sir Henry Haverford awaited them in his study, a room of dark wood and leather-bound books, its atmosphere as heavy as the man himself. Sir Henry stood by the window, his broad shoulders squared, his face a mask of aristocratic restraint. Yet Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing past facades, noted the faint tremor in his hand as he poured tea from a silver pot. "A dreadful affair," he said, his voice steady but his eyes weary. "Ashby was no friend, but to die at my table, it's unthinkable. My reputation, Inspector, may not recover." Craddock wasted no time. "You and Ashby had a rivalry, Sir Henry. There's talk of a business dispute. His attempt to take over your textile mills. Care to elaborate?" Sir Henry's jaw tightened, but he answered evenly. "Ashby was a predator in business, always looking to swallow smaller firms. My mills have been in the family for generations, but times are hard. He saw an opportunity and pressed it. We argued, yes, but it was business, not personal. I had no reason to kill him." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes on Sir Henry's face. "You arranged the seating, I believe," she said softly. "Lord Ashby was placed beside Lady Beatrice. Was that deliberate?" Sir Henry hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his features. "I thought it might encourage conversation. They're competitors, after all. I didn't expect, well, this." His voice faltered, and Miss Marple wondered if his discomfort stemmed from guilt, or merely the weight of hosting a murder. The final suspect, Lady Beatrice Langley, was summoned to the drawing-room, where Miss Marple had returned to her knitting. Beatrice entered with the grace of a panther, her silk dress rustling softly, her smile as sharp as cut glass. "This is all so tiresome," she said, sinking into a chair. "Ashby was a bore, but I didn't poison him. Why would I risk my own reputation at such a public event?" Craddock's tone was firm. "You were seated beside him, Lady Beatrice. You had opportunity. And your rivalry with Ashby is no secret. His death could benefit your business, could it not?" Beatrice laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Benefit? Perhaps, but I don't need to kill to win. My mills are thriving, despite Ashby's manoeuvres. Besides, I was at the table all evening, except for a brief moment to powder my nose." "Ask anyone." Miss Marple's needles paused. "A brief moment," she echoed. "Long enough, perhaps, to slip something into a dessert. The glaze, for instance. It was applied so late in the process." Her tone was mild, but her eyes were keen. Beatrice's smile tightened. "You're very curious, Miss Marple. I assure you, I did nothing of the sort. I'm no chemist, and I had no quarrel with Ashby that warranted murder." But her fingers, Miss Marple noted, clutched her handbag a fraction too tightly. As the interview ended, Miss Marple retired to her guest room, a cosy space overlooking the rose garden. She sat by the window, her knitting idle, her mind weaving through the morning's revelations, the chef's pride, the waiter's nerves, the host's secrets, the rival's ambition. Each was a thread in a tangled skein. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a poisoned cake had unmasked a jealous wife. "People," she murmured, "are so very predictable, yet so surprising." The laboratory results would confirm cyanide, she was certain, but the how and why remained elusive. The kitchen's unlocked pantry, the waiter's cut, the seating arrangement, the rival's absence, all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the garden, where the roses swayed in the breeze. Somewhere, she knew, lay the key, a single detail, overlooked by all but her. And she would find it, as she always did, with patience and a touch of village wisdom. Chapter 3. The Chef's Temper. The morning sun had barely crested the rolling hills of St. Mary Mead when Miss Jane Marple made her way to the kitchens of Haverford Hall, her sensible shoes tapping softly on the flagstone floor. The air was crisp, carrying the faint sweetness of dew-drenched grass. But within the kitchen, a different atmosphere prevailed, one of simmering tension and the sharp tang of cleaning agents. The vast room, with its gleaming copper pots and long oak counters, was a battlefield where Chef Pierre Dubois reigned supreme. This morning, however, his kingdom was under siege, not by critics, but by suspicion. Miss Marple, accompanied by Inspector Craddock, entered to find Dubois in a frenzy, scrubbing a saucepan with a vigour that suggested he was scouring away more than grease. Dubois was a wiry figure, his dark hair dishevelled, his chef's whites stained with the morning's exertions, his eyes dark and flashing, fixed on Craddock with barely concealed contempt. "This is an insult," he declared, his French accent slicing through the air like a well-honed knife. "My kitchen, my soufflé accused of such a thing. I, who have cooked for the finest tables in Paris, am to be questioned like a common criminal." He slammed the saucepan onto the counter, the clang echoing in the cavernous space. Miss Marple settled onto a stool, her knitting bag at her side, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Monsieur Dubois," she said, her voice soft as a summer breeze, "no one doubts your skill. The soufflé was a triumph, truly. I savoured every bite myself, but you understand we must explore every detail to find the truth. The flattery, subtle as it was, tempered Dubois' fury. He straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth, and launched into a detailed account of his process. The lemon soufflé, he explained, was a delicate creation requiring precise timing. Egg whites whipped to snowy peaks, fresh lemon juice squeezed only hours before, and a glaze of candied zest prepared in a small copper pot. I alone handled the glaze, he said, his chest puffing with pride. It is my signature, you see, the perfect balance of sweet and tart. I applied it to each ramekin myself, just before they were carried to the dining hall. Craddock, standing with his notebook open, pressed him. And you never left the kitchen during this preparation? Not for a moment? Dubois hesitated, his fingers tightening on the cloth. I did leave, briefly, he admitted, his voice dropping. The lemons in the pantry were not to my standard. Too soft, not bright enough. I went to the garden to pick fresh ones from the trees near the greenhouse. It was a matter of minutes, no more. My assistants were here, and the pantry was locked when I returned. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm beneath the conversation. She leaned forward, her eyes bright. Locked, you say? But I couldn't help noticing, Monsieur Dubois, that the pantry door has a rather flimsy latch, easily opened, perhaps, by someone familiar with the kitchen's ways. She paused, her gaze drifting to the door in question, its brass handle gleaming faintly in the morning light. Dubois' face reddened, but he held her gaze. No one would dare enter my kitchen without permission. My assistants know better. And the waiters, they are clumsy fools, good only for carrying plates. His scorn was palpable, but Miss Marple detected a flicker of unease in his eyes, as if he were replaying those minutes in the garden. Craddock shifted tactics. You had words with Lord Ashby, I hear, a month ago, at a private dinner. He insulted your cooking, didn't he? Dubois' temper flared anew. That man, he spat, his accent thickening. He called my coq au vin pedestrian. Pedestrian! As if he, with his coarse palate, could judge my art. I told him so, and he laughed, said I was an overpaid sauce-maker. But to poison him? Non, jamais. My revenge would be to serve him perfection he could not deny, not to ruin my reputation with such a crude act. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. A crude act indeed, she murmured. And yet, the poison was in your soufflé, Monsieur Dubois. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual when you returned from the garden? A scent, perhaps, or a misplaced utensil? Dubois frowned, his hands stilling. A scent? There was perhaps a faint bitterness, like almonds near the workbench. I thought it was the cleaning fluid. My assistants use it to polish the counters. But everything was in place, I swear. He gestured to the spotless kitchen, as if its orderliness could absolve him. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the almond-like scent. Cyanide, she knew, carried that telltale odour, though it was subtle, easily mistaken for something benign. She glanced at the workbench, noting a small jar of cleaning fluid tucked beneath a shelf. And this cleaning fluid, she said, pointing, is it kept in the pantry? Dubois nodded, his brow furrowing. Oui, but it is harmless, used only for surfaces, not food. You cannot think. He broke off, his indignation faltering under her steady gaze. Craddock made a note, his expression grim. We'll have that fluid tested, along with everything else in this kitchen. If there's cyanide here, we'll find it. He turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. What do you make of him? Hot-headed enough to kill? Miss Marple folded her knitting, her lips pursed. Monsieur Dubois is a man of passion, Inspector, and passion can lead to rash acts. But poison requires calculation, and his pride in his craft is genuine. Still, those minutes in the garden, they trouble me. She rose, smoothing her skirt. Shall we see the garden ourselves? It may have more to tell. The rose garden, a short walk from the kitchen, was a riot of colour, its blooms heavy with fragrance. The lemon trees stood near the greenhouse, their branches laden with bright fruit. Miss Marple moved slowly, her eyes scanning the ground. The earth beneath one tree was slightly disturbed, as if trodden by hurried feet. She crouched, her fingers brushing the soil, and found a small indentation, too precise to be natural. "Curious," she murmured, but she said no more, tucking the observation away like a skein of wool. Back in the kitchen, Craddock questioned the assistants, two young women who hovered nervously at the edge of the room. They confirmed Dubois's account. He had left for the garden, and they had been busy plating the main course. Neither had noticed anyone entering the pantry, but their attention had been on their tasks. Miss Marple listened, her mind drifting to a case in St. Mary Mead, where a cook's brief absence had allowed a maid to tamper with a pudding. Opportunity, she thought, is so often a matter of moments. As they left the kitchen, Craddock muttered, "Dubois is volatile, but he's right about one thing. Poisoning his own dish would be a blow to his pride. Still, that scent you mentioned, it's a lead." Miss Marple nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. The pantry's flimsy latch, the bitter scent, the disturbed earth, all were fragments, but they did ye not form a whole. She glanced back at the kitchen door, its handle gleaming like a silent witness. Someone, she thought, knew exactly when to act. Returning to the drawing room, Miss Marple settled into her chair, her knitting resuming its rhythm. Inspector Craddock lingered, his notebook filled with questions but few answers. "We'll speak to the waiter next," he said. "Thomas was the last to handle the dessert before it reached Ashby. If he's as jumpy as he was last night, he'll crack under pressure." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Pressure, Inspector, reveals much, but so does patience. Young Thomas may tell us more than he intends if we listen carefully." Her eyes drifted to the window, where the lemon trees stood in silent vigil. The chef's temper, she knew, was but one thread in a tapestry of motives, and she would unravel it, stitch by stitch, as she always did. Chapter 4. The Waiter's Tremor. The servants' hall at Haverford Hall, tucked away behind the grand staircase, was a modest space, its walls lined with faded wallpaper and a single window admitting a sliver of midday light. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood and the lingering warmth of a coal fire, though the hearth was cold now, mirroring the unease that had settled over the household. Miss Jane Marple sat at a small oak table, her knitting bag resting beside her. The soft click of her needles a steady undercurrent to the tension in the room. Inspector Craddock stood near the door, his notebook open, his broad shoulders filling the space with an air of authority. Before them stood Thomas, the young waiter who had served the fatal dessert, his lanky frame hunched as if bracing for a storm. His pale face, dusted with freckles, glistened with a faint sheen of sweat, and his hands twisted a frayed handkerchief, the bandage on his finger stark against his skin. Craddock's voice was firm but not unkind. honed by years of coaxing truths from reluctant witnesses. Thomas, you were the last to touch Lord Ashby's plate before it reached him. We need to know exactly what happened, every moment, every movement. Don't leave anything out. Thomas swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I told you, sir, it was a busy night. I was rushing, carrying plates from the kitchen to the dining hall. Chef Dubois handed me the soufflés, all lined up on a tray, and I took them out. Lord Ashby's table was my first stop, 'cause it was closest to the door. I set his plate down, same as the others. I didn't notice anything wrong, I swear. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes lifting to meet Thomas's. Her expression was gentle, almost maternal, but her gaze was sharp, catching the flicker of his eyes as they darted toward the window. It must have been quite a responsibility, Thomas, she said softly, serving such an important guest. Lord Ashby was a commanding presence, wasn't he? Did you speak to him at all during the evening? Thomas shook his head, his fingers tightening on the handkerchief. No, ma'am. I don't talk to the guests, not proper like. I just served the plates and kept my head down. He was loud, though. I heard him talking, making jokes about Sir Henry's mills, saying they'd be his soon enough. It didn't sound friendly, but I didn't pay it much mind. I had work to do. Craddock leaned forward, his pen poised. And the plate itself, Lord Ashby's soufflé. Did you handle it any differently? Check it, perhaps, or set it aside? Thomas's eyes widened, and he shook his head vigorously. No, sir. They were all the same, I swear. I took the tray from Chef, carried it straight to the table, and put the plates down one by one. I didn't stop to look at them. Why would I? His voice cracked, and the bandage on his finger seemed to draw his attention, his free hand brushing over it nervously. Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice as soft as a whisper. That cut on your finger, Thomas. How did it happen? You mentioned a broken glass, but such accidents are so rare for an experienced waiter, don't you think? Thomas flushed, his gaze dropping to the floor. It was after the dessert, ma'am, when I was clearing up. One of the wine glasses cracked in my hand. Must have been flawed. You know how glass can be. It nicked me, that's all. Nothing to do with the soufflé. His words tumbled out too quickly, and Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hands, as if the memory of the glass, or something else, unsettled him. Craddock's eyes narrowed. You're certain it was after the dessert, not before you carried the tray? Because if you were bleeding, Thomas, even a drop could have gotten on that plate, and we'd need to know. Thomas's face paled further, and he stammered, No, sir, I'm sure. It was after. I'd have noticed blood on the tray, wouldn't I? I'm careful, always careful. But his eyes flicked to the bandage, again, and Miss Marple's mind turned over the possibility that his injury was more than a clumsy mishap. A cut from a glass, perhaps. But when and where? And why the haste in his denial? She leaned forward, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. You must feel such loyalty to Sir Henry, Thomas, working here as you do. It can't be easy, hearing a guest like Lord Ashby speak so unkindly about your employer. Did it upset you, hearing those remarks? Thomas hesitated, his fingers stilling on the handkerchief. It wasn't right what he said, he admitted, his voice low. Sir Henry's been good to me, gave me this job when no one else would. Lord Ashby, he laughed like it was all a game, said Sir Henry's mills were done for, that he'd buy them up cheap. I didn't like it, but I didn't do anything, ma'am. I just served the plates. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, a soft click-click that seemed to steady the room. She thought of a young man in St. Mary Mead, a grocer's assistant who had once taken offence at a customer's slight and acted rashly, not with poison, but with a misplaced delivery that caused no small scandal. Loyalty, she knew, could be a powerful motive, as potent as greed or hatred. "And after you served the dessert," she said, "did you return to the kitchen at once, or did you linger in the dining hall?" Thomas blinked, caught off guard. I went back to the kitchen, ma'am. Had to fetch more trays for the other tables. Chef was shouting about keeping things moving, so I didn't stop." But his hesitation, brief as it was, did not escape Miss Marple's notice. She made a mental note, her mind weaving the waiter's words into the growing tapestry of the case. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. "That's all for now, Thomas, but don't leave the estate. We'll need to speak to you again." Thomas nodded, his shoulders slumping as he shuffled out, the handkerchief now a crumpled ball in his hand. As the door closed behind him, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "He's nervous as a cat, but is it guilt, or just the pressure of being questioned? That cut bothers me. If it happened before the dessert, he could have contaminated the plate, or worse." Miss Marple folded her knitting, her eyes thoughtful. "Young Thomas is frightened, Inspector, but fear can stem from many sources. He's loyal to Sir Henry, that much is clear, and Lord Ashby's words stung him. But poison? It's so precise, so deliberate. I wonder if Thomas has the nerve for it." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where the rose garden lay beyond. "The cut, though, it's a detail we mustn't overlook. A glass, he says, but the timing feels wrong." Craddock rubbed his chin. "We'll check the glassware in the dining hall, see if his story holds. If he's lying about when he cut himself, it could mean he was closer to the poison than he's letting on. What's your take, Miss Marple? You've a knack for seeing through people." She smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the wool in her lap. "People are much the same, Inspector, whether in a grand hall or a village shop. Thomas is hiding something, but it may not be murder. He's young, impressionable, easily swayed. Someone might have used that, don't you think? A word, a suggestion, a nudge to ensure the right plate reached the right man." Her voice was soft, but her words carried weight, and Craddock nodded, his mind turning over the possibilities. As they rose to leave the servants' hall, Miss Marple glanced at the table, where Thomas's handkerchief lay forgotten, its edges stained with a faint reddish brown. Blood, perhaps, or something else. She made no comment, but tucked the observation away, like a loose thread waiting to be pulled. The waiter's tremor, she thought, was more than nerves. It was a clue, a small ripple in the surface of a deeper truth. And Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, would follow it to its source, as she always did, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 5. The Host's Burden. The oak-panelled study of Haverford Hall was a sanctuary of tradition, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes and portraits of stern-faced ancestors gazing down with silent judgment. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the room, but it did little to warm the chill that had settled over the household since Lord Ashby's death. Sir Henry Haverford stood by a tall window, his silhouette framed against the leaded panes, his hands clasped behind his back. The morning light caught the lines of strain on his face, etching deeper the marks of a man bearing the weight of a public tragedy. Miss Jane Marple sat in a cushioned armchair, her knitting bag at her feet, her needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. Inspector Craddock stood near the desk, his notebook open, his expression one of dogged determination. "Sir Henry," Craddock began, his voice measured but firm, "we need to understand your relationship with Lord Ashby. There's talk of bad blood, business dealings gone sour. If there's anything you haven't told us, now's the time." Sir Henry turned from the window, his eyes weary, but his posture rigid with aristocratic resolve. "I've told you all I know, Inspector. Ashby and I were competitors, nothing more. His textile empire dwarfed mine, and he made no secret of his ambition to swallow my mills. It was a professional rivalry, not a personal vendetta. I invited him to the banquet as a gesture of civility, not to this." His voice faltered, and he gestured vaguely, as if the word murder were too heavy to utter. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes fixed on Sir Henry with a gentle intensity. "It was a generous gesture, Sir Henry," she said, her tone as warm as the firelight. "To host a rival at such a splendid event speaks of confidence, but I wonder, did you choose Lord Ashby's seat yourself? The table was so beautifully arranged, and he was placed beside Lady Beatrice, was he not?" Sir Henry's jaw tightened, a fleeting shadow crossing his face. "Yes, I arranged the seating," he admitted, moving to the desk and pouring a cup of tea from a silver pot, though his hand trembled slightly. "I thought it fitting to place them together. Two titans of industry, you know. It might spark conversation, perhaps even ease tensions. I had no inkling it would lead to what happened." He set the pot down with a clink, his composure fraying at the edges. Craddock's pen scratched across his notebook. "And you didn't notice anything unusual during the meal? No one lingering near Ashby's plate? No odd behaviour from the staff?" Sir Henry shook his head, his gaze drifting to the fire. "It was a whirlwind, Inspector. 50 guests, all demanding attention. I was playing host, ensuring everyone was comfortable. I didn't have time to watch every forkful. When Ashby collapsed, I thought at first it was a seizure, a heart attack perhaps, not poison." His voice dropped, and he sank into a chair, his hands gripping the armrests. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "It must be a terrible burden, Sir Henry, to have such a tragedy occur under your roof. The village is full of talk, you know, about your mills, about Ashby's plans. I heard from Mrs. Bantry, who heard it from her maid, that Ashby was pressing you hard, threatening to ruin you. Such talk can be so unkind, but it does make one wonder." Sir Henry's eyes flashed with a spark of anger, quickly suppressed. "Village gossip," he said, his tone clipped. "Ashby was aggressive, yes. He wanted my mills, and he made no secret of it. He'd been buying up shares, undercutting my prices, spreading rumours to shake my investors' confidence. But I was holding my own. I had no reason to resort to murder, Miss Marple. My reputation, my family's name, it's worth more than a business deal." Craddock leaned forward, his voice low. "And yet, Sir Henry, the poison reached Ashby's plate alone. Someone knew exactly where he'd be sitting. As the host, you controlled that detail. If you had a grudge, it would have been easy to ensure the right dessert went to the right man." Sir Henry's face flushed, but he held Craddock's gaze. "You're mistaken, Inspector. I had no hand in this. I wanted Ashby humbled, perhaps, but alive. A dead man buys no mills, and a scandal like this—" He broke off, running a hand through his greying hair. It could ruin me just as surely as his schemes." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a squire had been driven to desperation by a rival's taunts, though his revenge had been petty theft, not murder. Desperation, she knew, could twist a man's judgment, but Sir Henry's pride seemed too rigid for such a reckless act. Still, his control over the seating nagged at her. "You mentioned Lady Beatrice," she said softly. "Did you know her well? She and Ashby were rivals too, weren't they?" Sir Henry nodded, his expression guarded. "Beatrice and I have done business over the years. She's shrewd, ambitious, cut from the same cloth as Ashby, though with more charm. They clashed often, but she was a guest in my home. I trusted her to behave." His words were careful, but Miss Marple caught the faintest hesitation, as if he were weighing how much to reveal. Craddock made a note, his brow furrowed. "We'll speak to Lady Beatrice next. If there's a connection between her and Ashby, or you, we'll find it. For now, Sir Henry, don't leave the estate. We may need you again." Sir Henry inclined his head, his composure restored but brittle. "I'm at your disposal, Inspector. This house has weathered worse storms than this." He rose, escorting them to the door with a courtesy that felt strained. As they stepped into the corridor, Craddock muttered, "He's hiding something, Miss Marple." "That business about the seating. It's too neat, too deliberate. He knew exactly where Ashby would be." Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes thoughtful. "Sir Henry is a proud man, Inspector, and pride can be a heavy burden. He's not telling us everything but murder. It's so untidy for a man of his breeding. Still, the seating is a thread worth pulling. Someone used that knowledge, and I wonder who else knew the plan." Her gaze drifted to the grand staircase, where a portrait of Sir Henry's father loomed, its eyes as watchful as her own. Back in the drawing-room, Miss Marple settled into her chair, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The fire had died to embers, but her mind burned with questions. Sir Henry's strain, his careful words, the precise placement of Ashby beside Beatrice. They were pieces of a puzzle, each edged with suspicion. She recalled a village squabble, where a seating arrangement at a church fete had sparked a feud, though no one had died. "People," she murmured, "are so particular about where they sit." And in that particularity, she sensed, lay the key to the poison's path. With a quiet resolve, she tucked the thought away, ready to unravel the next thread in the tapestry of Haverford Hall's deadly banquet. Chapter 6. The Rival's Ambition. The drawing-room of Haverford Hall, with its brocade curtains and polished mahogany, held a quiet elegance that seemed at odds with the undercurrents of suspicion now swirling through the estate. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting soft patterns on the Persian rug where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles moving with their usual steady cadence. A tray of tea and biscuits rested on a side table, untouched, as if the ritual of hospitality could not quite dispel the shadow of Lord Ashby's Edger's death. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind him, his face set in the determined lines of a man sifting through a maze of motives. Lady Beatrice Langley entered with a rustle of silk, her auburn hair gleaming under the chandelier, her smile as sharp and calculated as a blade. She settled into an armchair with the grace of a queen, her green eyes flicking from Craddock to Miss Marple with a hint of amusement. "Really, Inspector," she began, her voice smooth as velvet, "this is all so theatrical. questioning me as if I were some villain in a melodrama. Lord Ashby was a tiresome man, but I had no reason to poison him. My battles are fought in boardrooms, not with cyanide. Her laugh was light, but Miss Marple noted the faint tightening of her fingers on the armrest, a gesture that belied her nonchalance. Craddock opened his notebook, his tone brisk. "Lady Beatrice, you were seated beside Lord Ashby at the banquet. You had opportunity to tamper with his dessert, and your rivalry with him is well known. His death could clear a path for your textile empire. Let's start with where you were during the meal, every moment if you please." Beatrice raised an eyebrow, her smile unwavering. "Where I was?" "At the table, charming my fellow guests as one does at such affairs. I barely left my seat, except for a brief moment during the main course to freshen up. The dining hall was crowded, Inspector, and I was hardly alone. Surely someone would have noticed if I'd been sprinkling poison like a cook with a salt cellar." Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes lifting to meet Beatrice's. "A brief moment," she said softly, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "How interesting, Lady Beatrice. The main course was such a flurry of activity, waiters coming and going, guests chatting. It must have been quite easy to slip away unnoticed. Tell me, did you pass the kitchen on your way, or perhaps the serving area where the desserts were prepared?" Beatrice's smile faltered, just for an instant before she recovered. "The kitchen? Goodness, no. I went to the powder room, down the corridor. I wouldn't dream of poking about in Sir Henry's kitchen. It's that Frenchman's domain, and he's rather territorial, isn't he?" She laughed again, but it rang hollow, and Miss Marple's keen gaze caught the slight flush rising in her cheeks. Craddock pressed on, undeterred. "Your rivalry with Ashby wasn't just professional, was it? We've heard talk of personal animosity. He outmaneuvered you in a deal last year, cost you a significant contract. That sort of loss stings, Lady Beatrice, enough to make a woman like you consider drastic measures." Beatrice's eyes flashed, her composure slipping. "Drastic measures? You overestimate Ashby's importance, Inspector. Yes, he snatched a contract from me, but I've weathered worse. My mills are thriving, despite his underhanded tactics. Killing him would be inelegant, don't you think? And far too messy for my taste." She smoothed her skirt, her movements deliberate, as if to reclaim her poise. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet curiosity. "Inelegant, perhaps, but effective," she murmured. "You're a woman of considerable intellect, Lady Beatrice. I understand you studied chemistry in your youth, a rather unusual pursuit for a lady. Such knowledge might prove useful, mightn't it, in ensuring a poison went undetected?" Her tone was mild, but her words carried a subtle weight, and Beatrice's fingers stilled on her skirt. "Chemistry?" Beatrice's laugh was sharper now, edged with irritation. "A schoolgirl's hobby, Miss Marple, nothing more. I hardly remember the periodic table, let alone how to concoct a poison. You're reaching, I'm afraid." But her eyes darted to Craddock, as if gauging his reaction, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her hand, quickly concealed by a flourish of her fan. Craddock made a note, his voice steady. "We'll be checking your movements, Lady Beatrice, and your background. If there's any connection to cyanide, or to anyone who might have supplied it, we'll find it. For now, tell us about your relationship with Sir Henry. You've been a frequent guest here, haven't you?" Beatrice's smile returned, though it was cooler now. "Sir Henry and I are old acquaintances. We've discussed business from time to time. His mills, my mills, the state of the industry. He's a gentleman, if a bit old-fashioned. I was here to enjoy his hospitality, not to plot murder. Surely you don't think I'd ruin his banquet for spite?" Her tone was light, but Miss Marple caught the undercurrent of calculation, as if Beatrice were testing the waters of their suspicion. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click-click filling the brief silence. "It's curious, isn't it?" she said, almost to herself, "how a banquet can bring out such hidden tensions. In my village, St. Mary Mead, we had a tea-party once where a guest's careless remark led to quite a stir. Not murder, of course, but it showed how a single moment can shift everything. Your absence from the table, brief as it was, might have been just such a moment." Beatrice's eyes narrowed, but she maintained her composure. "You have a vivid imagination, Miss Marple. I was gone for mere minutes, and I assure you, I did nothing but attend to my appearance. If you're looking for a culprit, perhaps you should focus on the kitchen staff, or even Sir Henry himself. He had more to lose from Ashby's schemes than I did." Her words were a deft deflection, but Miss Marple's mind seized on the suggestion, turning it over like a pebble in a stream. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. "That's enough for now, Lady Beatrice. Stay on the estate. We'll need to speak again." He turned to Miss Marple as Beatrice rose, her departure as graceful as her arrival, though her smile was now a thin line. "She's slippery," Craddock muttered. "All charm and no substance, but that chemistry angle. You think there's something to it?" Miss Marple folded her knitting, her eyes thoughtful. "Lady Beatrice is clever, Inspector, and clever people are dangerous when cornered. Her rivalry with Ashby was fierce, and her presence beside him was no accident. But it's her absence from the table that interests me most. A few minutes, she says, but long enough to act if she knew where to go." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where the rose garden lay in quiet splendour. "And her suggestion about Sir Henry, deflection perhaps, but it reminds us that this crime may have more than one target." Craddock rubbed his chin, his expression grim. "You think she's pointing fingers to cover her own tracks? Or is she hinting at something real? Sir Henry setting this up to look like an attack on him?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "People often reveal more than they intend, Inspector. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a woman who accused her neighbour of theft, only to betray her own guilt in the telling. Lady Beatrice wants us to look elsewhere, but her words linger, don't they? She knows more than she's saying, and I suspect her ambition runs deeper than we've yet seen." She rose, smoothing her skirt, her mind already weaving the threads of Beatrice's words into the growing pattern of the case. As they left the drawing-room, the weight of Haverfordhall's secrets seemed to press closer. Each suspect a knot in the tapestry Miss Marple was determined to unravel. Lady Beatrice's poise, her quick deflections, her fleeting absence, they were clues, subtle but sharp, and Miss Marple would follow them with the patience of a woman who knew that ambition, like poison, could hide in the most elegant of disguises. Chapter 7. The Garden's Secrets. The rose garden of Haverfordhall lay bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon, its blooms a vivid tapestry of crimson and blush against the emerald lawn. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, mingling with the sharper tang of earth and citrus from the lemon trees that stood sentinel near the greenhouse. Miss Jane Marple walked slowly along the gravel path, her sensible shoes crunching faintly, her eyes scanning the ground with a quiet intensity that belied her unassuming appearance. Her black lace dress fluttered slightly in the breeze, and her knitting bag hung from her arm, a familiar companion in her quest for truth. Inspector Craddock followed a step behind, his sturdy frame casting a long shadow, his notebook tucked under his arm as he surveyed the garden with a policeman's skepticism. "An odd place to come looking for clues, Miss Marple," Craddock remarked, his tone carrying a hint of indulgence. "The crime happened in the dining hall, not out here among the roses. What are we hoping to find?" Miss Marple paused beside a lemon tree, her fingers brushing the glossy leaves. "Oh, Inspector, gardens are such revealing places. They hold secrets, you know, things dropped in haste or hidden with care. Chef Dubois came here for lemons during the banquet, and I can't help wondering what else might have happened in those few minutes he was away." Her voice was soft, almost dreamy, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing as they traced the contours of the earth. She had returned to the garden after her morning's interviews, drawn by the memory of the disturbed soil she had noticed earlier. Now, crouching carefully to avoid soiling her dress, she examined the ground beneath the lemon tree. The earth was uneven, marked by faint impressions that suggested hurried footsteps. Near the base of the tree, half hidden by a clump of grass, a glint caught her eye. She reached down, her fingers deft despite her age, and retrieved a small glass vial, its label faded to near illegibility, but bearing traces of a chemical symbol. She held it up to the light, her lips pursing as she noted the faint residue inside, a crystalline powder that shimmered faintly. Craddock leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "What's that, Miss Marple? Some sort of poison?" She tucked the vial into her handkerchief, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps, Inspector. It's too soon to say, but it's curious, don't you think? A vial like this, discarded so carelessly in a garden where someone might have been during the banquet. We must have it tested, of course, but I suspect it's no accident that it's here." She rose, smoothing her skirt, and handed the vial to Craddock, who placed it carefully in an evidence bag. They continued their walk, circling the greenhouse, its glass panes fogged with condensation. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the structure, noting the door slightly ajar. "Did Chef Dubois mention entering the greenhouse?" she asked, her tone casual but her mind alert. Craddock shook his head. "He said he went straight to the lemon trees, picked his fruit, and returned to the kitchen. Didn't mention the greenhouse at all. Why?" Miss Marple stepped toward the door, pushing it open with a gentle nudge. Inside, the air was warm and humid, heavy with the scent of soil and growing things. Rows of potted plants lined the shelves, their leaves glistening, but it was a small workbench in the corner that drew her attention. Scattered across it were gardening tools, a pair of gloves, and a tin of fertilizer, its lid askew. She bent closer, her eyes narrowing as she caught a faint bitter scent, not unlike the one Dubois had described in the kitchen. "Almonds again," she murmured, her mind turning over the implications. Cyanide, she knew, could be derived from certain chemicals, and a greenhouse might conceal such substances under the guise of horticultural supplies. Craddock followed her gaze, his skepticism giving way to interest. "You think someone used this place to hide the poison? It's a stretch, Miss Marple. Gardeners use all sorts of chemicals. Could just be pesticide." "Could be," she agreed, her tone mild. "But it's the timing, Inspector. Someone was in the garden when Dubois was here, and this vial suggests they were careless, or meant to be seen as such. In St. Mary Mead, I once found a locket in a flower bed, dropped by a girl who thought she'd covered her tracks. It told us more than she intended. Her eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. They returned to the lemon trees, where Miss Marple paused to examine the ground once more. The impressions were faint, but they suggested a single set of footprints, smaller than a man's, leading from the tree to the greenhouse. A woman, perhaps, she mused, though she kept the thought to herself for now. Instead, she turned to Craddock. "Have you spoken to the gardeners? They might know who tends these trees, or if anyone was seen here during the banquet." Craddock nodded, making a note. "I'll have my men question them. If someone was out here, we'll find out who. But what's your theory, Miss Marple? You're seeing something I'm not." She smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the knitting bag. "I'm only seeing what's there, Inspector. A vial, a footprint, a scent. These are small things, but they speak. Someone took advantage of Dubois' absence, and this garden was their stage. Whether they meant to kill Ashby, or to cast suspicion elsewhere, I cannot yet say." Her gaze drifted to the greenhouse, its glass reflecting the fading light like a mirror to hidden truths. Back at the hall, Craddock sent the vial to the laboratory for analysis, along with samples of the greenhouse's chemicals. Miss Marple settled into the drawing room, her knitting resuming its rhythm as she turned over the morning's discoveries. The vial was a bold clue, almost too bold, as if placed to be found. She thought of Lady Beatrice, with her sharp smile and fleeting absence from the table, and of Thomas, whose nervous demeanour and bandaged finger suggested more than he admitted. Sir Henry, too, lingered in her mind, his control over the seating, his strained composure. Even Dubois, with his fiery pride, could not be dismissed. Each suspect was a thread, but the vial and the garden pointed to a deliberate act, one that required both opportunity and intent. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Haverford Hall, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to a case in St. Mary Mead, where a poisoned letter had been left in a garden shed, meant to incriminate an innocent man. "Misdirection," she murmured, her needles clicking softly. "It's always misdirection." The garden's secrets were beginning to whisper, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was listening, ready to follow their trail to the heart of the poisoner's plan. Chapter 8. The Servants. Whispers. The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Haverford Hall's morning room, casting delicate patterns across the polished floorboards. The room, smaller and less grand than the drawing room, was a place where the household's quieter moments unfolded, its walls adorned with faded watercolours of pastoral scenes. Miss Jane Marple sat at a small round table, a steaming teapot before her, the aroma of Earl Grey mingling with the faint mustiness of old upholstery. Her knitting bag rested at her feet, and her needles moved with their customary rhythm, a soft click-click that seemed to anchor the room's uneasy silence. Across from her sat Mrs. Gibbs, the housekeeper, a stout woman with a face lined by years of service and eyes that missed little. Inspector Craddock had excused himself to oversee the laboratory's delivery of the vial's analysis, leaving Miss Marple to pursue what she called the pulse of the household, the whispers of those who saw and heard more than they were asked to tell. Mrs. Gibbs poured tea with a steady hand, though her lips were pursed, betraying her discomfort with the morning's events. "It's a terrible thing, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, as if the walls themselves might carry her words. "Lord Ashby dead, and at Sir Henry's table. I've been with the family 30 years, and never have we had such a scandal. The staff are all aflutter, not knowing who to trust." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes warm with sympathy. "It must be quite unsettling, Mrs. Gibbs. A house like this depends on order, and murder is so dreadfully disruptive. You must hear all sorts of things working so closely with the staff. Tell me, what have they been saying about the banquet?" Mrs. Gibbs hesitated, her fingers smoothing the edge of her apron. "They're frightened, ma'am. The kitchen maids think it's the chef's doing. His temper's no secret, and he was that cross when Lord Ashby insulted his cooking last month. But others say it's young Thomas, the waiter. He's been jumpy as a rabbit since it happened, and that cut on his fingers got them talking." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze sharpening. "Thomas's cut, yes. He mentioned a broken glass, but I wonder if the maids saw anything more. Was he in the kitchen much that evening, do you know?" Mrs. Gibbs leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He was, ma'am, more than usual. One of the girls, Sally, saw him lingering near the pantry just before the desserts went out. Said he looked nervous, like he was waiting for something. She thought he was just dodging work, but now, well, folk are wondering if he was up to no good." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the detail. "And the pantry? Did anyone else go near it? Chef Dubois said he locked it when he went to the garden, but I couldn't help noticing the latch is rather flimsy." Mrs. Gibbs's eyes widened slightly. "You've a sharp eye, ma'am. The pantry's meant to be secure, but that lock's been loose for months. Sir Henry keeps saying he'll have it fixed, but you know how these things go. Sally said she saw Lady Beatrice near the kitchen corridor, earlier in the evening before the main course. Said she was looking for the powder room. But it's odd, isn't it? The powder room's the other way." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, though her expression remained serene. "Very odd indeed. Lady Beatrice is a guest who seems to know her way around Haverford rather well. Has she visited often, Mrs. Gibbs?" The housekeeper nodded, pouring herself a cup of tea. "Oh, yes, ma'am. She's been here a dozen times or more, meeting with Sir Henry about business. Textiles, mostly. Her mills and his, always some deal in the works. The maids say their meetings were tense, though. Sally overheard them arguing once, about Lord Ashby no less. Lady Beatrice called him a vulture, and Sir Henry didn't disagree." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft clicks blending with the tick of a mantel clock. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead gossip, Mrs. Price, who had once unravelled a village scandal by piecing together servants' chatter. "And what of Sir Henry himself?" she asked gently. "The staff must have opinions about their master, especially with Lord Ashby's threats to his business." Mrs. Gibbs sighed, her fingers tightening on her cup. "They're loyal to Sir Henry, ma'am, but they're worried. He's been short-tempered lately. What with the mills struggling, the footman, James, said he saw Sir Henry pacing the study the night before the banquet, muttering about Ashby. Said he looked like a man with the weight of the world on him. But murder? The staff can't believe he'd stoop to that. Not Sir Henry." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes thoughtful. "Loyalty is a powerful thing, Mrs. Gibbs, but so is desperation. And the chef? Any whispers about him beyond his temper?" I understand he's been ordering unusual supplies for the kitchen." Mrs. Gibbs's brow furrowed. "That's true, ma'am. He's been buying chemicals, he says, for cleaning, some new polish for the copper pots." The scullery maid thought it odd, though, 'cause it came in little bottles, not the usual barrels. She saw one in the pantry, tucked behind the flour sacks, but she didn't touch it. Didn't want to cross Monsieur Dubois. Miss Marple's needles paused again, her mind seizing on the detail. A bottle in the pantry, a bit of scent in the kitchen, a vial in the garden. Each was a thread, and they were beginning to weave together. "You've been most helpful, Mrs. Gibbs," she said, her voice warm. "Servants see so much, don't they? Things the rest of us overlook." Mrs. Gibbs flushed, pleased by the acknowledgement. "We do our best, ma'am. It's a good house, despite this awful business. Only hope you and the inspector can put it right." As Mrs. Gibbs bustled off to tend to her duties, Miss Marple remained at the table, her tea cooling as her thoughts churned. The servants' whispers were like the rustle of leaves in a storm, each one carrying a hint of the truth. Thomas's lingering in the pantry, Lady Beatrice's curious detour, Sir Henry's private burdens, and Dubois' mysterious chemicals. They painted a picture of a household teetering on the edge of secrets. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a maid's idle remark about a misplaced key had unravelled a theft. "The smallest voices," she murmured, "often speak the loudest." When Craddock returned, his face was grim. "The vial from the garden. It's cyanide, Miss Marple. Traces of it at least, though the label's too faded to read. The lab's testing the greenhouse chemicals now, but I'm betting we'll find a match. Someone hid that poison, and they weren't careful about it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "Or perhaps they were too careful, Inspector. A vial left in plain sight feels like a stage prop, don't you think? As if someone wanted us to find it." She folded her knitting, her mind turning over the housekeeper's words. Mrs. Gibbs mentioned a bottle in the pantry, possibly one of Dubois' cleaning supplies, and Thomas was seen there just before the desserts were served. "We must look closer at that pantry, I think." Craddock nodded, his jaw set. "I'll have it searched top to bottom. If there's more cyanide, we'll find it. But what's your hunch, Miss Marple? Who's behind this?" She rose, smoothing her skirt, her gaze drifting to the window where the rose garden lay in fading light. "It's too early for hunches, Inspector, but the pantry is a crossroads, isn't it? Everyone, Dubois, Thomas, even Lady Beatrice, passed near it, and Sir Henry, with his knowledge of the house, would know its weaknesses. The truth is there, in the whispers and the shadows. We only need to listen." With that, she tucked her knitting bag under her arm, ready to follow the next thread in the tangled skein of Haverford Hall's deadly mystery. Chapter 9. The Table's Clue. The dining hall of Haverford Hall, stripped of its banquet finery, stood in stark contrast to the glittering scene of 2 evenings prior. The long mahogany table, now bare of its damask cloth, gleamed dully under the muted light of a cloudy afternoon, its surface marred only by a few stray crumbs and the faint ring of a wine-glass. The crystal chandeliers hung silent, their prisms catching no light, as if mourning the tragedy that had unfolded beneath them. Miss Jane Marple stood at the far end of the room, her small figure dwarfed by the grandeur, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Her eyes, sharp and inquisitive, traced the contours of the table, lingering on the spot where Lord Ashby had sat. His life, extinguished by a single bite of poisoned soufflé. Inspector Craddock paced nearby, his boots echoing on the polished floor, his notebook open as he awaited the arrival of James, the footman who had cleared the plates after the fatal dessert. "It's a queer business, Miss Marple," Craddock said, pausing to survey the room. "The laboratory confirmed cyanide in Ashby's soufflé, but nowhere else, not in the other desserts, not in the kitchen's ingredients, except for traces in that vial you found. It was deliberate, targeted. Someone knew exactly which plate to poison." Miss Marple nodded, her needles idle in her hands as she stepped closer to the table. "Deliberate indeed, Inspector, and that precision is what troubles me. To poison one dessert among many requires not just opportunity, but knowledge of the seating, the service, the moment. I should like to see exactly where Lord Ashby sat, if you please." Craddock gestured to a chair near the head of the table, marked by a faint scuff on the floor where Ashby's collapse had shifted it. "Here," he said. "He was to Sir Henry's right, with Lady Beatrice beside him. Thomas served the dessert, and James cleared it after. Miss Marple approached the spot, her eyes scanning the table's surface. The wood was pristine, polished to a mirror-like sheen, but as she tilted her head, catching the light at an angle, she noticed a faint, irregular stain near Ashby's place. It was barely visible, a smudge no larger than a sixpence, its edges blurred but glistening slightly, as if kissed by sugar syrup. She leaned closer, her nose detecting a faint sweetness, not lemon, but something closer to the candied glaze of the soufflé. "Inspector," she said softly, "look here. This stain, could it be from the glaze?" Craddock crouched beside her, squinting at the mark. "Could be. The glaze was sticky, wasn't it? Might have dripped when the plate was set down. But why only here? The other places are clean." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind turning over the implications. The glaze was applied in the kitchen, according to Chef Dubois, but this suggests it was tampered with after the plate was plated, perhaps even after it reached the table. The poison, you see, was in the glaze, not the soufflé itself. That's why only Ashby's portion was deadly. Craddock straightened, his brow furrowed. "You're saying someone added the poison at the table? That's bold, with 50 guests watching. Lady Beatrice was right beside him. She'd have the best chance, wouldn't she?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. "Perhaps, Inspector, but boldness is not always what it seems. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a woman slip a note into a vicar's pocket during a crowded fete, and no one noticed because she was so very calm about it. A steady hand can do much in a moment of distraction." She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room. "Let us speak to James, the footman. He cleared the plates. He may have seen something." James entered, a wiry young man with a serious demeanour, his livery still crisp despite the household's turmoil. He stood stiffly, his hands clasped behind him, his eyes darting nervously between Craddock and Miss Marple. "I don't know much, sir," he said before Craddock could ask. "I was clearing plates after the incident. It was chaos, with everyone shouting and Dr. Hayworth trying to help Lord Ashby." Craddock's voice was firm. "Think carefully, James. You were at the table when the dessert was served. Did you notice anything unusual about Lord Ashby's plate? Its appearance? Its placement? Anything at all?" James frowned, his fingers twitching. "It looked like the others, sir. A soufflé, all puffed up, with that shiny glaze on top. I didn't touch it until after he collapsed. And then I only took it to the sideboard with the others. I didn't look closely. There was too much going on." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, her tone coaxing. "You did well, James, in such a trying moment. But tell me, did you see Thomas the waiter when he brought the desserts? Was he quick about it, or did he hesitate at all?" James's brow creased, his memory straining. "Now you mention it, ma'am. He did pause, just for a second, before setting down Lord Ashby's plate. Looked like he was checking something, maybe making sure it was the right one. I thought he was just nervous, being new and all, but it stuck with me, 'cause he didn't do it with the other plates." Miss Marple's needles clicked once, then stilled. "How very interesting," she murmured. "And Lady Beatrice, did you notice her at the table during the dessert course? Was she there when Thomas served the plates?" James nodded slowly. "She was there, ma'am, but she got up right after, said something about needing air. She was back quick, though, before Lord Ashby. Well, before it happened. I saw her fanning herself, looking pale, but I thought it was the shock of it all." Craddock made a note, his expression grim. "So Thomas hesitated, and Beatrice left the table briefly. That's 2 opportunities right there. Miss Marple, what's your take on this stain?" She stepped back to the table, her fingers brushing the smudge. "It's a small thing, Inspector, but small things matter. This stain suggests the glaze was applied, or altered, after the plate left the kitchen. Thomas's hesitation could mean he was ensuring the right plate reached Ashby, but whether he knew what was on it is another question. And Lady Beatrice's absence, brief as it was, gave her a moment to act, if she had the means." Her mind drifted to a St. Mary Mead incident where a spilled teacup had revealed a plot to discredit a rival. "The table," she said softly, "is where the truth was set down." Craddock rubbed his chin. Have the stain tested. See if it matches the cyanide in the glaze. If it does, we're closer to pinning this down. But Thomas or Beatrice, or both, someone's lying." Miss Marple folded her knitting, her eyes thoughtful. "Lying, perhaps, or simply not telling all they know. Thomas is young, impressionable, easily led, I think. Lady Beatrice, on the other hand, is a woman of calculation. And let us not forget Sir Henry, who chose the seats, or Chef Dubois, who left the kitchen unguarded. The table's clue points to precision, Inspector, and precision requires a plan." She glanced at the stain once more, its faint shimmer a silent witness to the crime. As they left the dining hall, the weight of Haverford-Hall's secrets seemed to settle heavier, each clue a step closer to the truth, but also a knot in the tangled skein. Miss Marple's mind was alive with possibilities, her village wisdom weaving the table's stain, Thomas's hesitation, and Beatrice's absence into a pattern that was almost, but not quite, complete. With quiet resolve, she tucked her knitting bag under her arm, ready to unravel the next thread in the deadly mystery of the poisoned dessert. Chapter 10. The Rival's Gambit. The library of Haverford Hall was a haven of quiet dignity, its high shelves brimming with leather-bound tomes that whispered of centuries past. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, its light pooling on a carved oak table where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles idle for once, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The air carried the faint scent of old paper and beeswax polish, undercut by a tension that seemed to cling to the very walls. Inspector Craddock stood by a tall window, the dusk beyond casting his shadow long and lean across the floor. His notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with the meticulous notes of a man determined to untangle the web of deceit spun around Lord Ashby's death. Lady Beatrice Langley had been summoned once more, and as she entered, her silk dress shimmering like liquid moonlight, her presence seemed to shift the room's gravity. Her auburn hair was swept up in an elegant twist, but her green eyes held a wary glint, as if she sensed the tightening noose of suspicion. Craddock wasted no time. His voice clipped and authoritative. "Lady Beatrice, we've found a vial in the garden containing traces of cyanide, the same poison that killed Lord Ashby. Care to explain how it ended up there, or why you were seen near the kitchen corridor during the banquet?" Beatrice's smile was a masterpiece of composure, though her fingers tightened briefly on her fan before she spread it with a practiced flick. "A vial, Inspector? How curious! I know nothing of it, I assure you." "As for the kitchen corridor, I was merely lost looking for the powder room. Haverford Hall is a labyrinth, and I'm not as familiar with its passages as you seem to think." Her tone was light, almost mocking, but Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in her hand, a crack in her polished facade. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "It's so easy to lose one's way in a grand house, isn't it, Lady Beatrice? But you've visited Sir Henry often, haven't you? Mrs. Gibbs mentioned your frequent meetings, business discussions, I believe. You must know the layout better than most guests." Her eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene, as if she were merely chatting about village gossip. Beatrice's smile tightened, her fan pausing mid-flutter. "Mrs. Gibbs is observant, isn't she? Yes, I've met with Sir Henry on occasion, but that hardly makes me a map-maker of his corridors. I was a guest, Miss Marple, not a conspirator skulking about with poison vials. Really, this is absurd." She turned to Craddock, her voice sharpening. "If you must accuse someone, look to the kitchen staff. That Chef Dubois, he's volatile, and he despised Ashby. Or young Thomas, so nervous he could barely hold a tray." Craddock's eyes narrowed, his pen poised over his notebook. "We're looking at everyone, Lady Beatrice, but let's talk about you. Your rivalry with Ashby wasn't just business, was it? He cost you a major contract last year, and word is your mills took a hit. His death clears the field for you, doesn't it?" Beatrice laughed, a sound like breaking glass, but her eyes were cold. "You give Ashby too much credit, Inspector. My mills are robust, despite his manoeuvres. His death is inconvenient, if anything. A scandal like this taints us all. If I wanted him gone, I'd have outbid him, not poisoned his dessert. It's far too theatrical for my taste." Her words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the faint edge of defiance, as if Beatrice were daring them to prove her wrong. Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost apologetic. Theatrical, perhaps, but effective. "And you did leave the table during the banquet, just before the dessert was served. A moment, you said, to freshen up. Yet the footman, James, saw you return looking pale, as if something had unsettled you. I wonder, Lady Beatrice, if it was more than the heat of the dining hall." She paused, her gaze steady, and added, "You studied chemistry in your youth, didn't you?" "A fascinating subject, so precise. One might learn how to handle a substance like cyanide without leaving a trace." Beatrice's fan snapped shut, her composure slipping for a heartbeat. "You're persistent, Miss Marple," she said, her voice low and tight. "Yes, I studied chemistry a lifetime ago, but it was a passing fancy, hardly a blueprint for murder. As for my absence, I was gone for mere minutes. If you think I slipped into the kitchen, tampered with a dessert, and returned without a soul noticing, you overestimate my talents." Her eyes flicked to Craddock, as if seeking an ally, but his expression remained impassive. Craddock made a note, his tone unrelenting. "The stain on the table, Lady Beatrice, near Ashby's place. It matches the glaze on the soufflé, and it had traces of cyanide. Someone applied that poison after the plate left the kitchen, possibly at the table itself. You were there, inches away. If not you, who?" Beatrice's lips parted, then closed, her fingers tightening on her fan until her knuckles whitened. "I don't know," she said finally, her voice steady but strained. "Perhaps Thomas fumbling with his tray, or Sir Henry, so desperate to save his mills, or even Dubois with his precious glaze. But not me, Inspector. I had no vial, no poison, no reason to risk everything for such a crude act." She rose, her movements graceful but deliberate, as if reclaiming her authority. "If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to." Craddock nodded curtly. "Stay on the estate, Lady Beatrice. We're not done." As she swept out, her silk dress whispering against the floor, he turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "She's cool as ice, but that fan, she was gripping it like a lifeline. You rattled her with that chemistry bit." Miss Marple folded her hands, her eyes thoughtful. "Lady Beatrice is a woman of ambition, Inspector, and ambition can make one bold, or reckless. Her absence from the table, however brief, was enough to act if she knew which plate was Ashby's. But the vial in the garden troubles me. It's too convenient, too easily found. A woman of her intelligence would not be so careless, unless she meant it to be found." She paused, her mind drifting to a saint. Mary Mead incident, where a dropped glove had been left deliberately to mislead a village constable. "Misdirection," she murmured, "is such a clever trick." Craddock rubbed his chin, his voice low. "You think she's playing us? Pointing at the vial to throw suspicion on Dubois or Thomas? Or maybe Sir Henry, since she keeps mentioning him?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "She's pointing, yes, but where? Her rivalry with Ashby was fierce, but her suggestion that Sir Henry had motive makes me wonder. A scandal at Haverford Hall would damage his reputation. Perhaps more than Ashby's death would benefit her. She's clever enough to see that, and clever enough to use it." She rose, smoothing her skirt, her gaze drifting to the library's shelves, where the shadows seemed to hold secrets of their own. "We must look closer at that moment she left the table, Inspector, and at Thomas, who hesitated with the plate. Someone ensured that poison reached Ashby, and they did it with a gambler's nerve." As they left the library, the dusk deepening outside, Miss Marple's thoughts were a tapestry of threads. Beatrice's absence, the stained table, the vial's convenient discovery. Each was a clue, but the pattern was still elusive, hidden in the rival's gambit. With her quiet resolve, she knew the truth was close, waiting to be unravelled with the patience of a woman who had seen ambition turn deadly before. Chapter 11. The final thread. The library of Haverford Hall, with its towering shelves and the faint scent of aged leather, had become Miss Jane Marple's unofficial sanctuary as the investigation neared its climax. The late evening light filtered through the heavy drapes, casting long shadows that danced across the polished floor. A single lamp glowed on the oak table, illuminating Miss Marple's knitting, which lay folded in her lap, her needles still for the moment, Her small, neat figure seemed almost part of the room's furniture. Yet her eyes were alight with the quiet intensity of a mind piecing together the final fragments of a deadly puzzle. Inspector Craddock sat across from her, his notebook worn from constant use, his face etched with the fatigue of a case that had twisted through too many motives and too few certainties. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the very walls of Haverford Hall held their breath, waiting for the truth to be laid bare. Craddock leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "We're close, Miss Marple. I can feel it. The vial from the garden, the stain on the table, Thomas's hesitation, Lady Beatrice's absence. It's all pointing somewhere, but I'm damned if I can see the whole picture." The lab confirmed the stain had cyanide, just like the vial, and it matches the glaze on Ashby's soufflé. Someone tampered with that plate after it left the kitchen, but who? And how did they know it would reach him? Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, her hands resting lightly on her knitting. "It's the knowing, Inspector, that's the key. The poison was no accident. It was meant for Lord Ashby, and only him. That requires precision, not just in the act but in the planning. Let us go over the threads once more, shall we? Sometimes the pattern only becomes clear when you step back." She began, her voice soft but clear, as if recounting a village tale. Chef Dubois, with his fiery pride, left the kitchen for those crucial minutes to fetch lemons. The pantry was unsecured, and a bitter scent lingered when he returned. Cyanide, we now know. Thomas, our nervous waiter, hesitated before serving Ashby's plate, as if ensuring it was the right one. Sir Henry, burdened by Ashby's threats to his mills, chose the seating, placing Ashby beside Lady Beatrice. And Beatrice herself, with her sharp mind and sharper ambition, slipped away from the table just before the dessert, returning pale but composed. Each had opportunity, each had motive, but only one had the means and the cunning to weave it all together. Craddock nodded, his pen poised. Dubois had access to the kitchen, but poisoning his own dish would be a blow to his ego. Thomas is jumpy, but he's no mastermind. Sir Henry could have orchestrated it, using his control over the seating, but why risk a scandal in his own home? That leaves Beatrice, hers, chemistry knowledge, her rivalry with Ashby, her absence from the table. She's the strongest fit, isn't she? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained grave. She is a strong fit, Inspector, but strength can be deceptive. The vial in the garden bothers me. It's too obvious, too neatly placed. A woman like Lady Beatrice, so meticulous, would not discard such evidence so carelessly. It feels like a stage prop, meant to draw our eyes. And yet, the stain on the table, the cyanide in the glaze, these are precise, deliberate acts. Someone used Thomas's hesitation, Sir Henry's seating, Dubois' absence. Someone who knew the house, the staff, the guests. Craddock rubbed his chin, his frustration evident. But who, Miss Marple? We've questioned them all, and we're still circling. The footman, James, saw Thomas pause, but he didn't see Beatrice do anything at the table. The maids saw her near the kitchen, but not in it. We need something solid to tie it together. Miss Marple's fingers brushed her knitting, as if drawing comfort from its familiar texture. Something solid, she echoed. Let us return to Thomas, Inspector. He's the weakest link, I think, not in guilt, but in resolve. A young man loyal to Sir Henry, easily swayed by authority. Suppose we speak to him again, gently but firmly, and ask about that moment he hesitated with the plate. He may know more than he's said, even to himself." Craddock agreed, and Thomas was summoned to the library. The young waiter entered, his lanky frame hunched, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept. The bandage on his finger was gone, revealing a healing cut, and his hands twisted nervously at his sides. "I've told you everything, sir," he said before Craddock could speak, his voice cracking. "I didn't do anything, I swear. I just served the plates like I was told." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost grandmotherly. "Of course, Thomas, we know you're a good lad. But that moment when you set down Lord Ashby's plate, James saw you pause, as if you were checking something. Can you tell us why? It might help us clear your name." Thomas's face paled, his eyes darting to the floor. I wasn't checking anything, ma'am. I was just nervous, that's all. It was a big night, and I didn't want to mess up." But his voice trembled, and Miss Marple's keen gaze caught the flicker of fear in his eyes. Craddock leaned forward, his tone firm but not harsh. "Thomas, if you're holding something back, now's the time to say it. We know the poison was in the glaze, applied after the plate left the kitchen. You were the last to touch it before Ashby. If someone told you to do something, to pick a certain plate, you need to tell us." Thomas's hands shook, and he sank into a chair, his resolve crumbling. "It wasn't like that," he whispered. "I didn't know about any poison, I swear. But Lady Beatrice, she gave me a note just before the dessert course. It was folded, slipped into my hand when I passed her table earlier. Said to make sure a specific plate, the one with a tiny mark on the rim, went to Lord Ashby. She said it was a special dessert, a surprise for him. I thought it was just, something fancy, not poison." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Miss Marple's needles remained still, her mind racing. "A note," she said softly. "Do you still have it, Thomas?" He shook his head, his voice muffled. "I threw it in the fire, ma'am. I didn't think it mattered. Not until he died. I didn't know, I swear I didn't." Craddock's eyes blazed with sudden clarity. "That's it, Miss Marple. Beatrice used Thomas to deliver the poison plate. She marked it, knew where Ashby would sit, and made sure it got to him. But we need more than his word to prove it." Miss Marple nodded, her expression calm but resolute. "We have more, Inspector. The stain on the table, the cyanide in the glaze, Thomas's hesitation, they all point to a plan, and Lady Beatrice is at its heart. Her absence gave her time to apply the poison, perhaps in the corridor, or even at the table, with a sleight of hand no one noticed. The vial in the garden was her misstep, meant to implicate Dubois or distract us. But her motive, she wanted Ashby gone, yes, but also Sir Henry disgraced. A scandal at Haverford-Hall would weaken his mills, leaving her to dominate the market. Craddock sent for Lady Beatrice, who entered the library with her usual poise, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Confronted with Thomas's confession, her composure cracked. "A note?" she said, her voice sharp. "The boy's delusional. I gave him no such thing. You've no proof, only his word against mine." Miss Marple's voice was soft but unyielding. "The proof is in the pattern, Lady Beatrice. Your absence, your knowledge of chemistry, your rivalry with Ashby, your visits to Sir Henry, all threads that lead to you. You marked the plate, slipped Thomas the note, and applied the cyanide, knowing it would ruin both Ashby and Sir Henry. A clever gambit, but not clever enough." Beatrice's face drained of colour, her fan falling to the floor. "You can't prove it," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Craddock signalled to a constable, who stepped forward to escort her away, her protests fading into the shadows of the hall. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting untouched, her mind at rest. "Ambition," she murmured, "is such a dangerous thing." The final thread had been pulled, and the tapestry of Haverford Hall's deadly banquet was complete. Chapter 12. The Quiet Resolution. The morning after Lady Beatrice Langley's arrest, Haverford Hall seemed to exhale, its grand rooms settling into a subdued calm, as if relieved of a great burden. The rose garden beyond the tall windows bloomed with defiant beauty, its colours softened by a light mist that clung to the lawns of St. Mary Mead. In the drawing-room, where the tragedy had begun, Miss Jane Marple sat in her familiar armchair, her knitting bag at her side, the soft click of her needles a gentle counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock. The fire crackled low, casting a warm glow across the polished furniture, and a tray of tea steamed quietly, its fragrance mingling with the faint scent of beeswax. Sir Henry Haverford stood by the hearth, his broad shoulders less rigid now, though his face still bore the strain of the past days. Inspector Craddock, his notebook tucked away, leaned against the window frame, his expression a mix of relief and quiet admiration. "It's a remarkable thing, Miss Marple," Craddock said, his voice warm with respect. "You saw through the tangle when we were all chasing shadows. Lady Beatrice, such a calculated mind, and yet she overreached. That note to Thomas, the vial in the garden, it was almost too clever, wasn't it?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes twinkling with a modesty that belied her sharpness. "Not so remarkable, Inspector. People are much the same, whether in a grand hall or a village cottage. Lady Beatrice's ambition was her undoing. She wanted Lord Ashby gone, and Sir Henry's reputation in tatters, but she underestimated the small things. A stain on a table, a boy's hesitation, a housekeeper's gossip, these are what tell the truth." She resumed her knitting, the scarf growing steadily under her deft fingers. Sir Henry turned from the fire, his voice heavy with gratitude. "I owe you a great deal, Miss Marple. This scandal could have ruined me, my family, my mills. To think Beatrice would go so far, not just to kill Ashby, but to disgrace my house." He shook his head, his eyes shadowed. "I invited her here, trusted her as a guest. I never imagined she'd use my banquet as her stage." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, almost maternal. "You couldn't have known, Sir Henry. Ambition blinds people, and Lady Beatrice was blinded by her own cleverness. She saw your banquet as an opportunity, not just to eliminate a rival, but to weaken you, her other competitor. The poisoned dessert was her weapon, and poor Thomas, her unwitting pawn." She paused, her needles clicking softly. "In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a woman who sabotaged a rival's garden to win a flower show. Not murder, of course, but the impulse was the same, a desire to triumph at any cost." Craddock nodded, his thoughts turning to the evidence. "The note was the key, wasn't it?" Thomas burning it was a setback, but his confession sealed it. And that stain on the table, cyanide in the glaze, applied after the plate left the kitchen. Beatrice must have slipped it on during her absence, knowing Thomas would deliver the marked plate to Ashby. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, Inspector, the note was her boldest move, but also her mistake. She relied on Thomas's loyalty and fear, but young men like him are fragile under pressure. The vial in the garden was meant to point us to Chef Dubois, or perhaps to confuse us, but it was too blatant for a woman of her subtlety. She played her hand well, but not well enough. Sir Henry sank into a chair, his hands clasped tightly. And my mills? The scandal will linger, I fear. Ashby's death, Beatrice's arrest, it's all anyone will talk about. How do I rebuild from this? Miss Marple's voice was kind but firm. You will rebuild, Sir Henry, because you must. The truth is out, and that's a start. The village will gossip. Oh, they always do. But gossip fades, and your name is old and strong. Hold your head high, and let time do the rest. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where scandals flared and died like summer storms, leaving the village to carry on as it always had. Craddock stepped forward, his tone brisk but warm. We'll wrap up the formalities, Sir Henry. The case is solid. Thomas's testimony, the cyanide traces, the stain. Lady Beatrice won't wriggle out of this. Thanks to Miss Marple, we've got justice for Lord Ashby, and your house is clear. Sir Henry rose, offering Miss Marple his hand. Your discretion, your insight, I can't thank you enough. Haverford Hall is in your debt. His grip was firm, but his eyes held a vulnerability that touched her. She smiled, releasing his hand. It's only a matter of observing, Sir Henry. People reveal themselves if you watch closely enough. She gathered her knitting bag, her small figure radiating a quiet strength as she prepared to leave. As Craddock escorted her to the waiting car, he chuckled softly. You make it sound so simple, Miss Marple, but I've seen enough to know better. You've a mind like a steel trap, and we're lucky to have it. Miss Marple's laugh was light, almost girlish. Oh, Inspector, it's only village wisdom, nothing more. A few threads, a bit of patience, and the truth comes clear. She climbed into the car, her eyes lingering on Haverford Hall's ivy-clad walls as it pulled away. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple settled into her cottage, the familiar comfort of her parlour wrapping around her like a shawl. She sipped tea by the fire, her knitting resumed, the scarf now nearly complete. The poisoned dessert with its web of ambition and deceit was a memory now, but it lingered in her thoughts, a reminder of how fragile civility could be. She recalled a village tea party, where a bitter word had sparked a feud, and smiled faintly. Human nature, she murmured, is never dull. As the fire crackled and the village slept, Miss Marple's needles clicked on, ready for the next puzzle that St. Mary Mead or beyond might bring.